Hey everyone, I'm back for another reading of a chapter from a book I once wrote back in the 1990s called Where is the Hope? This chapter today actually covers a portion of one of my favorite stories of all time that Jesus told, and one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. Just know it only hits on a portion of the story, and it actually doesn't even get to the punchline of the story. But I've been thinking about maybe after this series of readings is over, so maybe after Thanksgiving or the first part of December, of doing another series of readings. And one of the last sermon series I did back in the days when I was the lead minister at the South Lake Church was a 6 week study of Luke chapter 15. And I'm thinking about resurrecting that series and doing some readings from the greatest short story that Jesus ever told. So just keep that in mind. May do that later, but for now, let's dive in to this chapter called A Distant Land. A Distant Land. The story is one which has been told countless times. Not only has it been told countless times, it has been lived out by thousands and thousands of people. Unfortunately, they don't always end on the same note as this one. It's the story of young boys who aren't content with what they have. Although they have more than most people could ever dream of, it wasn't enough to satisfy them. It's about young girls who search for fulfillment. They don't find it in their comfortable surroundings, so they set out and search for what they regard as happiness, only they never really find it. It's the story of confused people who search for true meaning and happiness when it is right under their noses. It's the story about the lost. You remember the story, don't you? The youngest son wanted what was coming to him. He wanted his inheritance and he wanted it right now. His father divided the inheritance between him and his brother. He left and his older brother stayed. The younger son packed his bags and headed for a distant country in a vain search for what he thought was true happiness. His lifestyle was one that was described as wild living. You name it, he probably did it. He went from one hangover to the next. He probably even went from one girl to the next. If he wanted a party, he had one. His life was one big party. His only concern was himself. After a while, he blew everything he had. He spent all of his money. I imagine his clothes were ragged, his stomach was empty, and his desires were still unmet. He was so hungry that he would have eaten the corn cobs in the pig slop, but no one would give him any. The party was over. His search ended in vain. He never really found what he was looking for. The saddest part of this story is that it's not an isolated one. The same thing Jesus described nearly 2,000 years ago happens every day. Think about it for a second. I imagine you don't have to think long before the names and faces begin popping up in your head of the ones who decided to search in a distant land for happiness. Stories of people who aren't satisfied with what God has blessed them with. Stories of people who have been confused by the great deceiver himself. The ones who were confused into thinking that what God has in store for them is not enough. Many of them never return from the distant land. And I imagine that if you think long enough, you'll also realize that these people still haven't found what they're looking for. Have you ever wondered why? The reason true happiness is not found outside of Christ. Let me say that again. True happiness is not found outside of Christ. Go back to the younger son for just a minute. Essentially, All he ever really wanted was nice clothes, food, and fun. Not much has changed through the generations. He thought he had to go to a distant country to find it, when what he really wanted was at home all the time. He just didn't have sense enough to realize it. Remember the scene? When he came to his senses, he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. By the way, I look forward to unpacking that sentence so much more in the next series. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Did you catch it? His father gave him the very things he had been looking for: a robe, a feast, and a party. And our Father will do the same today. You don't have to go to a distant land. All you need is right here, just waiting for you. But did you also notice that the Father let the Son make his own decision? How the Father must have wanted to go and make his Son come home. No doubt our Father wants to do the same. But the choice is yours. No one can make it for you. As much as the Father longs for his children to stay home, he can't make that decision for them. It must be their choice. Because if it isn't, it won't be out of love, and therefore it won't last. So I encourage you, choose the homeland over the distant land. Would that everyone would come to their senses and realize that everything they need in life can be found in a relationship with Jesus Christ. Don't go to the distant land. It's time to come home. I suggest that you come home before dark. That is my plea, and that is my prayer. And folks, that's another reading from a book called Where is the Hope? I pray for the people in your world who have chosen a distant land, even if it's for a moment or for a season. I pray that they too would come to their senses and come home because their Father loves them so much. Hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.